This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. Today we're going to talk about one of the more critical aspects of law enforcement. It's an aspect that I bet you're going to be surprised when I tell you what that is, because when most people think about law enforcement, it's going out, catching the criminal, putting cases together, those type of aspects. Really, folks, the most critical part of law enforcement leadership right now in today's era is the training of law enforcement officers and deputies, ensuring that they have the proper training to go out and do a very difficult job under very difficult circumstances, with more and more regulations and more added training requirements placed on them. So training is very highly important. The Spokane County Sheriff's Office, we invest a lot of money into our training. We invest a lot of money into training not just our own staff, but we've opened our in-service training up to the region. We provide regional training, and at any given point, we've trained anywhere from 2,000 to 3,500 law enforcement professionals from, quite frankly, across the world. We've had people from Japan, Australia, Malaysia, Israel come to Spokane for training. Training is what we do, and we do it very well, because the failure to train leads to one of the biggest losses a law enforcement agency can have, and that's your trust. We need to be able to train, be highly professional, highly proficient, competent, and have the confidence in when we're out there doing the job. So with that in mind, I have on the show with me today Mr. Val Lubans from Val. I'm going to make a mistake on the company's name already, so go ahead and introduce the company's name. And you've been doing this for 40 years, so go ahead and introduce yourself a little, and we'll talk a little bit about the dynamics of training, what you do as far as the training aspect. So just kind of give an idea for folks what your background is.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sheriff. It's a pleasure to be with you. As the Sheriff said, my name is Val Lubans. The name of my company is Systems Design Group. I'm based in Connecticut, and I've been here since I went to university in Connecticut. Over the intervening 40 years, I've done job task analysis studies, mostly for state post organizations. That is, like Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission. In fact, I did them 30 years ago with remarkable people that I work with. During the intervening 40 plus years, I've done at least one statewide job task analysis study in 30 different states, as well as worked for the Department of Justice in Africa and for the United Kingdom British Home Office. And I've worked with individual agencies, but mostly with statewide studies. I have done work with agencies as large as Washington Metropolitan Police, or Charlotte Mecklenburg County, or NYPD. So I've never been a police officer. I'm not sure I have what it takes to be a cop, to be frank. But what the sheriff has described is vital. It's a pleasure to work with law enforcement, and it's a pleasure to work with Spokane County. So there. Hope that was brief enough.
You know, Val, when we're looking at training, building curricula, and solid curricula, the job task analysis is one of the more, in my opinion, it is the base of all curricular development. How can you develop curricula if you do not understand the task that the individual has to perform, because if you don't understand what the job is, what those tasks that they have to perform are, how can you train them to do it? We just brought you in to do a job task analysis for the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, and to help us with that, so we could get our training that we create certified through IATLAS. And the reason we did that is, sadly, the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission, their curricula doesn't have a job task analysis that is relevant at this point. You did one 30 years ago. This job has changed drastically in those 30 years.
Sure it has.
And the state's curricula, based on their own experts, has been deemed to be legally indefensible, which put us in a position of, we have to create legally defensible curricula so we can train our folks on key aspects. And we brought you in to do the job task analysis, and we're also going to have you do a job task analysis on the supervisory positions, so we can ensure that we're training our supervisors in relevant curricula to help them be successful in the supervision and leadership of the agency. But we have a few slides that we're going to go through and talk about. But let's start with the first slide, Val, of, what is job task analysis? Why is it important?
Right. The first slide does give you a definition of what a JTA is. But I'm going to speak briefly, but a little more broadly. The JTA is the very foundation for the human resources system that every organization has to have. You have a civil service commission, state employees commissions, whatever. Whether you work for IBM, you have a human resource system, and you have to do things like select people, train people, promote people, evaluate people, assign people. All of those things, to do them correctly, require knowledge of what the job is. What does the person we want to hire to be a deputy in Spokane County, what does that person have to be able to do before he or she is trained or selected? And what will we train them to do once they've been selected? And the job task analysis is a systematic process that reveals that information. Now, I have seen states create a system that it's really based on the best interests, hopefulness, an optimistic notion. Gosh, we ought to teach them this. No, that's not how you do it. That's the loudest voice in the room approach to curriculum development. A systematic examination of the things performed in that job, evaluated by experts, is how you develop your entire HR system. But the greatest part of that is training.
And that is non-negotiable in my book.
Oh, absolutely not.
The old axiom, fail to train, you are going to basically prepare people to fail. And
yep.
I can't stress that further, because over my lifetime, and I've worked in 4 law enforcement agencies, when it comes down to budget time, and if there's any cuts that need to be made, I've watched leaders in the past cut their training. So one of the first things they cut. And I've always questioned that. Quite frankly, when I got into positions of authority, I pushed back on it. At one point, I ran the training unit for the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, and I highlighted, you cut training, you are putting this entire agency at risk. You're putting the deputies and the public at risk. Training is the last thing that should ever be cut, but it seems to be the first thing that some agencies, some leaders will throw on the table to cut, and that you can't do that, especially in today's environment. And the next slide, if we can go to that, You know, when we talk about the JTA and developing the training, you know, you come up with three general steps in doing that. And
Right.
and could you kind of explain why these three are so important?
Right. Well, first, let's just go to what I did with your personnel. You engaged me to do a task analysis of for patrol deputies, and you wanted to know very clearly uh, what is it that they do to great specificity, and what do they need to learn in order to do that safely and maintain the trust of the public, as well as maintain their personal security. Well, we've identified over the course of this 40 years over 800 tasks. A task is just a statement of a verb and a result. For example, uh, places, uh, what are those? Places traffic cones to secure a collision scene. That's a task. And there are 800 or more of those statements like that that represent the work of a deputy from the least important thing to the most important thing, and it's a huge range. I mean, why else would you have to maybe spend 4 months in school and acquire college credits? Because the work is very complex, circumstances change, so on. So we write all the tasks and we review them with your subject matter experts. We have the officers tell us how often they do these tasks, and we have your patrol supervisors and commanders rate those tasks in terms of criticality and when they should be learned. Are they learned on the job, like street addresses, or are they learned in advanced training, or are they learned in the academy? And tasks that fall below a certain standard get set aside. They're not significant. You still do them, but they're not significant. And so then that collecting that, we had in your organization 100% participation. We were able to very clearly document what are the tasks and what are the most important tasks that patrol deputies do in Spokane County. And then we're able to compare that, what it takes to do the job of Spokane County, to what the training that's provided is. And that's why we did the job analysis.
And when we were going through that process, um, you were very clear that we needed basically total buy-in from
Yeah.
staff and and from the supervisors to get this done.
Yep.
This was not uh, a very light lift for the agency
No.
or any agency. And the reason I bring that up, folks, is th- this process was very detailed and it was very, very structured. And we really, I was really proud of the agency in that they took this very seriously.
Yep.
And that just shows again the importance that the line staff on up put on training and being able to create the best training that we can for the
Yep.
agency. Um, let's take a look at the next slide. And this is an interesting question when you sent this one to me, as far
Yeah.
as when to conduct this analysis. And I when I reviewed the material, I was like, why? And this may be rhetorical, Val, but what impressed me when I looked at this slide was, why is it that some agencies don't get this? That that they don't even take the time to do this, because it seems that this this should be exactly where we start everything and base everything on.
Yeah.
So, I'll let you go through the slide, but with the thought in mind of, why is it that some agencies don't do this?
There are two kinds. I mean, there are some states that I've worked where it's actually a matter of law that they do their JTAs for law enforcement every 7 years. They are totally committed to the environment of law enforcement, which is constantly changing. There's a core set of tasks that don't change, but the environment, the techniques that you use are constantly changing. So you want to be able to document the job that's being performed. I remember years ago introducing into my questionnaires. And by the way, your early making point, I want to let people know the questionnaire is online and it takes about 3 hours to complete. So if I can get an officer to sit down and to sit at the computer and give me his thoughtful or her thoughtful responses, I'm very pleased and very grateful. The fact that we had 100% response in Spokane County is a testament to your leadership, is more just as much as anything. But as to conducting the job analysis, and there are other organizations that think that a JTA will tie their hands. I mean, what a notion that they don't want to know what it is that cops do. I I can't get past that, Sheriff. I'm sorry. I don't deal with people like that.
And going and talking about again the when to, the next slide talks more about the aspects of when should we,
Yeah,
and you know when that first bullet, when the position you seek to fill is unlike any other position in your agency. A lot of people don't realize, Val, I think, especially for law enforcement, that exactly what you just mentioned, it changes. It changes
yep,
sometimes weekly.
yep,
And positions change with those outside forces. Let's say the Supreme Court comes down with a new ruling that hey,
yep.
you can't do that particular technique anymore, or you
That's
have
right.
to change the way you do that technique. And we see this on a constant basis that, some of our current positions, they don't even look anywhere near what they used to a decade ago.
That's right.
And so as we talk about, technology plays a heavy role in
Yep,
the transformation of things that a single position can do, are the responsibilities of that position. And
yep,
it seems to me, like you said, there's a lot of misguided thought process, in my opinion,
yep,
when it comes down to, well, we'll just hire an expert to come in and train. Well,
yep, yep,
how do you evaluate that if you don't
yep,
know how to look at that business plan that this expert's bringing in
yep.
for the training versus is it going to really meet what the needs of the
Right.
deputy is?
What you need is information about what your people do, not what they might do, but what they do. You don't, the training has to fit your needs. You don't have to fit their needs. It's vital when you have a job as complex as a law enforcement officer, when you have over 800 tasks, where you have split second decisions that have to be made. It's a very complex job. It's not an assembly line pulling this lever or moving that one or putting this in a box. It's complex. Every decision is being made and it can have enormous impact. Uh, Law enforcement itself has changed. You go from the beat officer to the vehicle officer to community oriented policing to the duty to intervene. All of these things are emerging things as society and as law enforcement evolves. You have to stay with it. You can't just say, well, we did this 30 years ago. We're okay. No, you're not. I mean, a simple thing is using a cell phone to document a crime scene. You tell me where that shows up in a curriculum. It doesn't, because it should. It's no big deal. But the point is, that's what cops do. I mean, training sometimes has to catch up with policing. I prefer training to be in advance of policing. That requires people like you who think forwards, who think strategically. But it's training. I can't. You're getting me. I'm spending too much time talking. Go ahead, sir. Next question.
Let's take a look at the next slide, because I have a particular bullet on that next slide. You touched on it,
Yeah.
but a lot of people don't realize that JTA actually should be used as a basis of the very first step of bringing somebody into a law enforcement agency, which is the applicant assessment aspect.
That's right.
Explain to folks, because like I said, you touched on it earlier, but kind of go a little bit more in depth as to why that is so important.
Right. Well, just once you identify, let's say there's a task, let's call it response to resistance. I don't like to use force anymore. Response to resistance. Now that could be taught, but what are the psychological dimensions of a person who has to decide how to respond to resistance? That becomes then part of the selection process. What if, when I've done a lot of set medical standards and psychological standards for employment, one element that is often lacking in the employment process is to assess a person's capacity to control his response, to impulse control. If we're not measuring impulse control, who are you hiring? I mean, if your job is to intervene, to stop a bad practice, why aren't we identifying personal integrity in a tangible way? So the reason we use the job analysis is to establish the basis for an entire human resource system. It's for legal purposes, we have to demonstrate that every standard is job related to an essential task. I remember working in one state where they were going to design the physical requirements to be a police officer, and they used the state police SWAT team to set the standard. Oh, come on, that's not realistic. Not every officer in a small town needs to be a SWAT standard, but you need some physical capability. And what is it? And we've defined it, and we get down to physical fitness standards and so on. So by documenting what it takes to do the job, what it takes to do the critical task, that allows us then to design selection standards and defend selection standards. What I don't like is people don't understand the need to defend selection standards. That if you're oblivious to what it takes to do the job and you make the wrong decision, you know what that is? That's negligent failure to train. If your decision to hire the officer you knew had to have impulse control and you chose to ignore that, that really fringes on deliberate indifference. That you could adversely impact the constitutional rights of a citizen and you don't care, you're on the hook.
Very much so, and people don't quite understand that. Failure to train is one of the biggest reasons law enforcement agencies get sued. Negligent hiring practices is another, and negligent retention. If you identify somebody that should not be wearing the job, does not have the capabilities, does not have the temperament, does not have what you said earlier, which is the most important thing a law enforcement officer has to have, is integrity, then that's failure on your side to not deal with that and remove that from the agency, which leads me to one of the next bullets in that slide we were just on, which is to provide legally defensible training. And I mentioned earlier, ladies and gentlemen, the state of Washington's Basic Law Enforcement Academy curricula is legally indefensible. It hasn't had a JTA done in 30 years, and it hasn't been updated over a decade, which is actually against their policies. That puts every CEO in this state, every law enforcement CEO in this state, every sheriff and every chief, in the position of not being able to do what Val just mentioned, of getting on a stand and testifying that our training is legally defensible. Val, why is that so critical that we have that ability to sit on that stand and defend our training?
If you're not able to, this is, it's so difficult being a police officer. If you have hired someone who then decides to kneel on the neck of a person struggling, who's asking to be sitting upright, and it turns out that the standard setter never told them how to properly detain and control a person who was resisting, and it was reasonable to think that you should have, there's negligence attached to that. So all of these things have to be considered. I was called in as an expert witness, and I probably won't be too long-winded. There was the state police called me in to be their witness because they had been involved in a hostage shooting. And the question that the plaintiff's attorney wanted to know was, were the state troopers at the scene trained in responding to a hostage situation? The answer was yes. And there was a record of their performance. There was record that the instructors were qualified, so the state could be able to defend itself. But the sheriff's department, the person who responded, who ended up shooting the woman, had not been trained. And therefore, the sheriff's department was on the hook for that. Or another instance, which gets to negligent assignment, which continues the examples that you gave. An officer who was clearly physically unfit was sent to a scene where he too soon used deadly force and just wounded the person. The plaintiff sued and was awarded $750,000 because the department assigned a person to do a job that was reasonably expected to happen, and the person wasn't physically able to do it. So whether it's negligent failure to train, or negligent assignment, or negligent selection, or negligent evaluation, all of these things rely upon your being able to show that every standard you have is based on a job task analysis. It's not wishful thinking. It's not saying, oh, but we talked to such and such an expert. No. What does it take to do this job? And are these people prepared to do it? That's the only measure.
Which leads us into the next slide in this discussion of the legal requirements.
Yeah.
Go over because I don't think a lot of people understand just how regulated by law certain aspects of our training, certain aspects of developing training and or personnel management are mandated. These aren't suggestions. Yep. These are mandated.
Yep. No. I'll just go back to my cover this in the report, but there's a long history that goes back to the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, the uniform selection elements, that it is well established what you need to have done to defend any of your personnel practices. The key one is to show the job relatedness of your standard. If you're not able to show that the selection standard or the training standard. And when I say training, I mean passing a test. If that standard that you propose cannot be defended as being job related, you can't use it. You have to, it's not fair to deprive someone of employment because they can't pass a standard that has nothing to do with the job. You may think it has something to do with the job, but at some point you're going to be asked to show that it is job related. The most recent case, and I'm a great proponent of physical fitness, as once defined by the Cooper Institute. There was a law passed that said you cannot use different standards for men and for women. Well, the fact is, unless there are differences between men and women, and clearly the physical fitness of men and women is measured differently. In one jurisdiction, they decided to have exactly the same standard for men and for women, and the women sued because they were being adversely impacted. Well, the courts found in their favor because what was happening was that women were being held to a level of fitness that had nothing to do with the job. They had to be more fit than men, and it was unfair. And the jurisdiction had to pay a lot of money to make up for the fact that women had been discriminated against. But in one state, I designed a physical performance test that you had to exit your vehicle, run to a building, run up 3 flights of stairs, push open a door, run back down the flight of stairs, scale a wall. So all key physical activities, and the time was based on actual officers doing it. And if it's performance, then you can have a single standard. But again, you need to know what is the content. You just can't come up with a notion about what kind of people cops ought to be without showing, well, why do you say that? I mean, is this job related? What does it take to do the job? And that becomes the basis of all of your selection standards, assignment, evaluation. All these things are defined by the JTA. You have to have scientifically collected job information that withstands scrutiny, and people can say, yeah, that's what the job requires. And if you flunk that test, you shouldn't be a cop. So
Let's go to the next slide because I'm showing this one for you folks so you can actually, if you're interested, you can hit pause when you're listening to the podcast here, take a look at. It gives you an idea of where you can go to actually find some of the stuff that that Val is talking about. But let's go to the next slide after this one and talk about the job analysis data that's used during this process.
Yeah. Now, we've covered a lot of this already, Sheriff. We define what it takes to do the job. The JTA defines what are the training needs. People come to a job with certain skills and abilities. We are able to define which skills and abilities should be demonstrated prior to selection, and which skills and abilities are introduced to the job applicant or the candidate after they've been hired. So this is a large part of what it takes, based on the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Uniform Guidelines, all of this. What does it take to do the job? What do you have to have before you're hired? And what do you have to know after you've been hired? So that defines selection standards as well as the training needs. We can get into classification where you evaluate by using a numerical formula. What is the value of this job based on the kinds of decisions they make, the impact of their decisions, who they supervise, and so on, gets into classification. But it's the JTA is what you need to have in place in order to have a fully defensible, robust human resource system.
Well, getting ready to wrap up.
Yeah.
For us, the Spokane County Sheriff's Office, we look at training, and it's actually one of our foundational core values.
Yep.
If you look at our core values, there's a structure to them, really. We start with integrity. If you don't have that, there's no way you can be a police officer. And everything is based on that. We sum up integrity with one word: honor. Because I don't hang the words trustworthiness, all that stuff on the walls of my agency. And there's a reason for that. If I have to do that, then I hired the wrong people. If I have to tell people they have to be trustworthy, I already made the mistake. I hired the wrong people. One word should be able to remind people what it's all based on. The next part of our core values are training, education, and innovation. Because that's really where we have to be and focus. Because if you focus there, it moves to the next foundational core value of competence. Because if you're not trained well, you will never be competent in doing the job.
That's right.
And if I can get our staff to the competent level, I get them to the most important, in my opinion, level of maybe the entire cycle except for the last one. And that is confident in doing the job. Because there's no way a deputy or a law enforcement officer will ever be able to de-escalate somebody if they do not have the confidence to stand and do just that. You have to have confidence that you can rely on your training, you have the knowledge base, you know what you are doing out there, you are highly competent, so you have the confidence in that highly emotional, highly volatile, and quite frankly, highly dangerous environment they're in, to stand and talk with somebody and talk them down, talk them out of that gun, talk them out of the knife, put it down. Folks, I've had that discussion with more times than I want to even remember of, sir, please put the gun down. Put it down. And I've been able, so far in the 32 years of doing this job, to be able to talk somebody into doing that. Now, not all of us are that lucky. Sometimes you don't get that luxury because sometimes that individual is determined to create or commit a horrible act that has to be stopped. But it really comes down to how confident you are in your abilities to be willing to stand there while somebody's got a gun and that gun is semi-pointed in your direction, to stand there and talk them out of that gun. And if we can get them there, Val, if we can get them to the confident aspect, then we can, the professionalism comes into play. The service ability, they go out and they do great service, and they're highly skilled and provide great customer service. And at the end of the day, we really earn what the whole goal is the public trust. Those are our core values. Yeah. But without the training, you'll never get them to the point that they're there with that confidence level. And the work that you do is highly important to the success of the man and woman wearing the badge on the ground, being able to, at the end of the day, serve the community to the best of their ability, do it safely, and move on, and be able to have a successful career. Job task analysis, training, you've been involved in a lot of it. We're one of the, IADLES tells us we're one of the only, or we are the only law enforcement agency in the entire United States that takes training and has it certified at the national level.
That's true.
We brought you in because we saw a gap. We're creating this training, but we need to make sure that we have the foundational basis
That's right.
to say that, yeah, we're actually creating training that is relevant. And I appreciate the fact that that you spent the time with us and the work that you've done with the Spokane County Sheriff's Office. Last words in closing. What would you stress to the citizens of our county as far as the need to perhaps get involved in the legislation and try to get our training at the state level where it needs to be, because we really are in a little bit of peril here.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to use the word, phrase, in harm's way. The police cannot do their job without the support of the public. I know when I did a lot of work in England, in UK, there it's the whole police system is based upon public support. If the public withdraws its support for law enforcement in the UK, it's over. It is a society willingly giving up some sense of liberty in order for it to be protected. And that has to be the reality in this country, is that people have to support police, but they have to have confidence that the cops are being selected wisely, trained comprehensively, and supervised successfully. And with your leadership, you're well on your way. But without the public support, I'm not sure what the point of it is.
I would agree with you, and that's one of the things that I guess we're blessed in this area, in that the citizens of Spokane County highly support their law enforcement.
Yeah.
And I thank them for that on a daily basis. The deputies out there know the amount of support that they have from this community, and the trust levels that we have. But you know, Val, that trust level is only an instant away from diminishing if we don't do this right.
That's right.
And you know, we're committed to doing it right. I thank people like you who are committed in helping us do it right. And I look forward to the next phase of our partnership of getting that JTA for our leadership corps, so we can ensure that we're building the best supervision and best leadership we can for this community. Thank you for being on the show with me today, folks. Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich, just some things to think about.
Hi, this is Larry Myers, normally at River Ridge Hardware, here at Peters Hardware, where I've been blessed to be able to buy it. Initially started in 1934 by Bill Peters, and I was blessed to be able to purchase that from the Peters family. Peters Hardware is located at 12118 East Sprague, enter off of Pines and First. We have all the quality home products that you need, including quality paint now, where we can match any color that you want. We're here for you for all your home needs. Come on by to Peters Hardware in Spokane Valley.